My real business here tonight, or this afternoon, is to introduce this wonderful speaker that we have here from Tustin, California. And she told me to tell you that it's about 15 minutes from Disneyland, so to identify it here. But when I heard her tape, there were so many things that I could identify with, and I think, that gets me right there. I did that. That's me. And I thought she just had to come and talk to us. May I introduce you to Mary R. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Mary, and I'm an alcoholic. Hi. First, I want to thank Paul and the committee here for asking me to come out here. I'm enjoying myself immensely, and I'm caught up with the whole spirit of the thing, as I usually am. I always like to know if there are newcomers here, and I would like to ask those people with under 30 days of sobriety if they would please raise their hands. We have at least 2, 3. And I'll also address whatever remarks I have to make to you shoppers. And I would say to you shoppers that if you are at an AA convention or even a meeting on a Saturday afternoon, wondering whether you're an alcoholic or not, that's like a virgin going to the doctor to get a rabbit test. You must have had some clues along the way. But I understand the reluctance of admitting to alcoholism, because I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, and I sure wasn't an alcoholic. So I'll have to say to you that I did not come with a desire to stop drinking. I had stopped many times, and that was not my answer. For me, it was better to drink, which gives you a slight idea of the state of mind I came in. Now, I want to tell you that I am a primary alcoholic. I was an alcoholic right from my first drink. I don't know anything about social drinking, nor do I care to learn, in spite of what Chapter 3 says, that it is the great obsession of every abnormal drinker that somehow, someday, he will return to normal drinking. How can you go back to where you've never been? And besides, did you ever observe those people? I would say to you people who are wondering to maybe follow me emotionally through a thing that I went through with my brother about 5 or 6 years ago. My brother, who had invited me and an AA friend to his house for Christmas, and the first person I met there was a little old lady, and she had one of these tall, anemic drinks with mix and ice and garbage in it. And she was sipping that drink. And she was tiddly and giggly. And I wanted to belt her in the mouth. I still can't get over the feeling that they're wasting the booze. And we got inside, and her son was trying to be drunker than he was. One of those disgusting spectacles. And my friend and I were getting very uncomfortable in this situation. In fact, I saw a man put his drink down on the coffee table and go into the next room and leave that drink there unattended for about 10 minutes. And doesn't that scare the hell out of you? God, my hands sweat when I even talk about that. And then, now there were about 5 or 6 people there that were, quote, drinking. And I went into the kitchen because I was getting uncomfortable in the living room, and there was the supply. There was a pint on the table with the lid on it. And it embarrasses me to tell you, because it was at my brother's house, that there was a jigger beside that pint. And then I guess my sister-in-law put the frosting on the cake, because she'd had a couple of drinks, I guess, and she was stirring something on the stove. And my brother came in and he said, "Connie, would you like to have another drink?" And you know what she said? She said, "No, thanks. I'm beginning to feel mine." My God, how does that grab you newcomers? So, I would like to make the statement, because it's important for me to tell you that it has not been necessary for me to take a drink or a pill or smoke any of those funny cigarettes or any mind-bending things, and that's what we call sobriety in California, since my first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, which was March the 29th, 1961. That isn't exactly true, because I said it hasn't been necessary. It's been necessary, but I've been allowed to stay sober. As I said, I was an alcoholic right from my first drink. I was in show business. I left home at the age of almost 16. My mother and I hated each other, and I had all these worlds to conquer with my great talent as a dancer, and I left the day after I graduated from high school. I was about 16, I guess, and it was while I was on this road show, that I was introduced to slow gin. Now, I know that isn't the in drink and hasn't been for a long time. I'm very aware of that, and I know that ages me, and that dates me. And speaking of that, for some time I've been wondering about whether I should get one of those facelifts that the ladies are getting these days, you know. And then on sober reflection, as we say, what's the point in having a facelift when everything else is sagging 2 inches below where it used to anyway? And, you know, it really gets bad when you find yourself trying on one of those cross-your-knees bras. Yeah. So to hell with it. And, you know, that's a message there, because that kind of shows you that I've, you know, come a long way in the area of acceptance. Just acceptance, that's all it is. But I took that drink of slow gin. It was pink, and it was palatable, and it was easy going down, and I felt good for the first time. I didn't know I was wired for alcoholism. I was always uptight, scared, born scared, idealistic, a dreamer, and all those things that I found out after I got to Alcoholics Anonymous. And what that alcohol did for me was it just smoothed everything out, and I felt a part of. And I can't say that I was a daily drunk. I wasn't for a long time. But it seems to me that every time I did start drinking, I got drunk. And I always overshot the field, because I really never intended to get as drunk as I did. But for me, somebody said it this morning or last night, I think it kept me glued together for a long time, because I was, you know, a kooky kid. I wound up in the nightclubs of San Francisco as a featured dancer. And that would be a dream world for any alcoholic woman, because, you see, I had the spotlight on me at all times, and I was written up in the columns, and I was wearing fancy clothes, and I had a nice place to live, and a lot of attention from the men, and yet I was empty inside. And at that time, I knew that my fulfillment would come when I got invited to go to Hollywood and take a screen test and, you know, conquer the world with this great talent of mine. I always felt that my answer was always in the future. When I got him, when my prince came over the hill on that white Charger, and I would get those things, and I always came up empty. And the day came when I was invited to take a screen test in Hollywood, And I went down there with the attitude that Betty Davis had better start saving her money. That was the outside arrogance, but inside I was scared to death. And I took the screen test, and it was rotten. How can you act when you're already acting? I didn't know any of those things. But it's a strange thing to me that that I got attracted to the drinking crowd right away. Now, I hear a lot of newcomers say, what am I going to tell my friends, or all of my friends drink? Well, of course they do. We don't hang around people that don't drink like we do. They all drink. And I tell you right now that I'm not against drinking. I am against dying of alcoholism. That's what I'm against. And so I was signed to a stock contract anyway for a couple of years, and I got caught up with the drinking crowd and made all of the fancy nightclubs and dinner places and wore fancy clothes and did my acting out there, pretending that things were all right and things were happening in my life, and yet inside I was unfulfilled, scared, and wondering where I was going from here. I knew there was just no future for me. I just felt it instinctively. But I was saved from that fate by a man who came from the USO office and offered me an opportunity to go overseas and entertain the soldiers, because the World War was on. World War II was on. And I jumped at this chance because the first thing that I thought of was all the attention I was going to get from all those men over there. See, I was used to a lot of attention, which I wasn't getting at that studio. And I of course, I had to pretend fierce patriotism and went overseas. And if there are any of you, and I'm sure there are some of you fellows that were in that war, who have resentment against USO girls fraternizing only with the officers, I would like to maybe remove some of that resentment, because I was very democratic with my drinking. I didn't give a damn who had it. I just said, where, and let's go. Now, you know, I wasn't an alcoholic, for God's sake. Yet it was necessary for me to protect my right to drink, to defend my right to drink. Because on this first tour, we were over in Africa, China, and Burma, and India. And here we were over in China, high in the Himalaya mountains, and we were drinking it up. And the next morning, I came to, and I was totally paralyzed from, well, the only thing that was moving was my eyelids. And my roommate noticed there was something terribly wrong with me, and she went and got the medics, and they came trooping in and gave me shots and oxygen, and I don't know, they walked me around. They worked on me for about 2 hours just to get me on my feet and functioning again. And you know, I blamed the altitude. I really sold myself on that. In fact, I didn't even drink in Denver after that, because I knew that I couldn't drink in altitude. And, you know, that's part of that selling that old line to oneself. They say we were con artists, but the biggest con person was myself. I conned myself more than anybody else. I came back from that tour feeling very put upon because the military had not told us that they expected us to entertain and drink and, you know, carry on with between shows. Well, actually, they hadn't demanded that of us at all. I demanded it of myself. And the reason I did that is because I was one of those that desperately needed approval. I needed everybody to adore me. And therefore, I couldn't say no to anything or anybody. And I'll tell you one thing. I got unlocked from that cell right here in Alcoholics Anonymous. Because today, I'm able to live in a manner that's acceptable to me regardless of public opinion. Because you see, in seeking everybody's approval, I had to play all these different parts and compromise, make those nickel and dime compromises all the time, and do all those things to get their approval. And in Alcoholics Anonymous, I was given my own approval, and that's the one I needed all the time. my own approval. And most of the time I have that. I would like to say, since this is such a fantastic story, that I don't want to leave this convention, or this audience even, giving you the idea that I have, a little over 18 years sobriety and I've got it all together. I want to make it clear to you people that all of my character defects are intact. They're intact. Somebody was talking about the 10th step, and I'll tell you how far I've gotten on that one. I say I'm wrong when, not promptly admitted it, eventually admitted it. My character defects are intact. The only difference is that I handle them differently, but I still got the same damn feelings inside, which I'll talk about a little later on. I was offered the opportunity to go over to the European theater after my first tour, and I said to myself, it's a strange thing how somebody followed me around and wrote chapter 3. I said to myself, this time it's going to be different. This time everything's not going to go by me in a big gray haze, and I'm not going to drink so much, and I'm going to tend to my P's and Q's and do my work and not get into any trouble. And I went over there, and I got into a lot of trouble because it was different over there. It was worse because they had more booze and more action and more guys and more parties and more everything else, and I had no way not to get involved. And so I'm probably the only USO girl that was up for court-martial. I was a bad drunk, yeah. What they do is they give you a temporary rank of captain when you go overseas like that in time of war, and I have to go through this whole story because I always tell it, because I have a dream. I was always madly in love. Either that or I was recovering from love, and I don't know which I enjoyed the most. See, when you're recovering from love, you can turn on that sad music and get that jug out and really weep those bitter tears and say, if only. If only. What are you giggling about? If only. And, the thing is that I used to edit. I was a great editor. I would start on that if only and dream about this handsome prince that I'd just thrown out of my life or who had left my life, and just remember the romantic, tender, wonderful times and edit out all the crap, the real part, And I could talk myself into, I get lonesome for the agony. Did you ever do that? And go back, right, put myself right in that same position again. Lonesome for the agony. God, I used to love it, though, that bittersweet agony. I used to love that. Anyway, I had fallen madly in love with this lieutenant at one of the drunken parties, and here I found myself some towns away at another party, and I decided that I must talk to this man immediately about my great love for him. And I got on one of those field telephones where they go by relays, and sometimes it takes 10 minutes to make the connection. And while I was waiting for this connection to happen, this captain, who was also drunk, leaned over me and was asking me to go drink or play or whatever. And I told him very dramatically that I was contacting this great love of mine, and he did a terrible thing. He took his thumb and disconnected. And I said, Captain, if you do that once more, I'm going to hit you. And he didn't believe me, because I just about got through again, and he did it again, and I had the phone in my hand, and I hit him on the ear as hard as I could, inadvertently, I like to say. And, it stunned him, I guess, until he saw what must have been a shocked look on my face. And that look on my face was due to the fact that I could see the blood gushing out of his ear and down his white trench coat. And when he saw that, he ran across the street to where the MPs were hostled, and he signed out all these complaints, and they all came trooping over, and he pointed at me. Did you ever have anybody point at you? Pointed, there she is. And, I was in agony for the rest of the night, trying to figure out how the hell I'm going to get out of this one. I was ordered to appear the next day at 10 o'clock. And so I figured out that since there were 14 girls on the show besides myself, that if I took 2 brunettes with me, that there was an outside chance that he was so drunk he wouldn't be able to identify me. It was the only outside chance I had. So I appeared the next morning with these 2 gals, and poor Captain was sitting there. He had one of those hangovers that were coming over in waves, 2 poached eyes, and oh God, he was just a mess. And what happened was he couldn't identify me. And, as I said before, I have this dream, and I always tell this story because I have a dream that one day I'll be talking about this, and of course I hope he made Alcoholics Anonymous. I hope he found his way here. I'm pretty sure he is one of us. And I'll be saying this from the podium, and he'll be in the audience, Might even be today, I don't know. And after the meeting, he'll come up with his hand extended, and he'll say, "Mary, I'm the captain that you hit on the ear in Germany." And I'm going to let him make his amends to me. We weren't always wrong, I told you my character defects are still intact. Things were just getting really bad inside myself. It seemed to me that from then on, somebody was turning the lights out all over the world. It seemed to me that the world was turning kind of gray, and I really wasn't getting what I got before from the alcohol. It was just a nowhere kind of thing, and there were times when I was tired of drinking, just tired of it. But it was alcohol was not my problem, it was my answer. It was not my problem, it was my answer. It answered everything for a long time. And when I came back, I was so depressed, and of course I blamed it on man's inhumanity to man, the things that I had seen over there in Germany and also in China, the atrocities and those kinds of things. And I just knew that the only place where I had any fun was in San Francisco, where they knew me, and all my old drinking buddies were there, and we used to have a lot of laughs. And so I headed back there after I came back. And strangely enough, everything there seemed to have changed. Even my friends, my drinking buddies, they all seemed different, and there wasn't any. It seemed to me they took the laughs out of the booze. I don't know. I was kind of wandering around, floating around, lost, with no direction really. I wasn't getting anything really out of the booze. And so I lived with a couple of philosophies, one of which was change conditions and things, and then everything will be all right. And so I decided that it was time for me to get married and settle down and do all those things. And I carefully selected a victim. It happened to be a bartender I couldn't stand. And, he didn't drink, which should have been my first clue. But, the women of Al-Anon have come to know that every pot goes out and finds a lid that fits it. And this is true in this case also, because he turned out to be a compulsive gambler. And to give you a clue as to what kind of a marriage, well, it really wasn't a marriage, it was more like a suicide pact. What kind of a marriage this was, he gambled my drinking money and I drank his gambling money. And that's a tense way to try to live, I'll tell you. We not immediately, but very soon moved down to the San Fernando Valley, and as I look back on it, I'm quite sure that we were taking the geographic for each other. And that didn't work out, as you well know, because I found a drinking buddy right across the street from me, and he found some bookies up on the corner, and the race was on again. Now, I could not stand another failure in my life. I felt that I was such a failure in every area of my life that I could not stand the idea of this marriage failing. So I was determined that this was going to be the marriage of the century. When I saw it really deteriorating, I thought, well, maybe if I have a baby, then everything will be all right. And so I got pregnant. And now I changed the whole image of what I was going to be. I was going to be a perfect wife, mother, housekeeper. I was going to be so perfect. And this woman that I was going to be did not drink. She wore pink curlers to the market. She hung her clothes out on Mondays, out on the line. She did her lawn on Sundays. She did all those things. And she didn't drink. So I went on the wagon. God, that chokes me up when I use that phrase. Out west, we call the wagon transportation between drunks. And that's what it always was with me. I did go on the wagon, and I became a compulsive housekeeper. There are always one or two in the audience. I used to clean the corners with pins. And I had little Q-tips that I got in the little nooks and crannies with. I had a toothbrush that I cleaned the lettering on the appliances with. And if the old man got out of bed in the middle of the night to go to the John, his bed was made before he got back. Now, you may think that's a little alcoholic exaggeration, and it probably is, but not much, because I was talking someplace once, and an Al-Anon woman came up to me after the meeting, and she was laughing because she had identified with this, and she said, you know, I did something you didn't do. And I said, what's that? And she said, I used to blow the dust out of the keyholes. So, you know, it's things like that that make me know I'm in the right place. Because those are the things I even hid from myself. I was afraid to even look at those things. I knew I was crazy. And this went on, you know, and when the baby was born, it's a wonder I didn't boil him. By that time, I was washing the walls with Hexol and keeping everybody away from that baby. It was just absolute total madness. I knew I was crazy. I knew it. But there was nothing I could do about this obsessive, compulsive kind of thing. I was just driven, and there was nothing I could do about it until I found that I was pregnant the second time. And I don't know about you, but I drank with two attitudes. One was, what's the use? And the other was, I'll show him. And here it was, what's the use? I had planned my first son's entire life. I had planned which schools he was going to, what kind of clothes he was going to wear, what kind of friends I would allow him to have. I had it all planned out, and here comes this intruder. And I hadn't planned that. And here it was, what's the use? And I went back to drinking. Much to the relief of my family and friends, I might add. Because they knew me drunk, but crazy. Anyway, I didn't, of course, I'm saying that I didn't know anything about the disease of alcoholism when I was really deeply involved in it. I didn't know the things then that I know now. It seems to me that within a very short time, I was again drinking totally out of control out in suburbia. And by now I had found a watering place. I had found my haven. I had found the corner bar. And, I used to love the bars. I used to love that unreal atmosphere, that dark with the tinkling piano and the tinkling of the ice glass. And, I could walk into one of those places with $1 and stay for 3 days. And you guys that are laughing were the ones that were picking up my tab. But I used to love it in there because, they really appreciated me. I mean, they would tell me how intelligent I was and how desirable and all these things. And, I didn't even know until 2 or 3 years ago. I heard a lot of gals talking about going into bars and picking up the guys. I never did that. And I thought to myself, why did I go there? I'll tell you why I went there. I went there to get validated. I wanted somebody to tell me something, that I was worth something. And even though I knew they were probably lying to me, I wanted to believe it because I had lost any identity I had. I was, again, such a total failure in all these things that I wanted to be. And I just needed somebody to tell me that I was kind of okay. That's why I went to the bars. That's why I hung around people that would tell me those things. And it occurred to me that, I never met a common laborer in one of those bars. I always met nuclear scientists and, attorney generals and all those things. Attorney general that reminds me of this thing. I have to tell you this because I heard it this morning. Two guys were, it has nothing to do with AA. Two guys were talking. One of them said, "What do you think of Carter?" And the other one said, "I think that guy really has come a long way. He's really got himself together. He's a changed guy. He's honest, and I believe him, and he's open. He's just that son of a bitch in the White House I can't stand." I guess it's kind of AA because he's one of us. Billy is. Anyway, after my second son was born, my husband left me, and he came back, and he left me. It was always back and forth. That neighborhood must have thought he was in the cleaning business or something, because that station wagon was always full of his clothes, coming or going or something. And it was always with the promise that I wouldn't drink so much and he wouldn't gamble so much. And you know how that works out. It didn't. And as a result of one of these joyous reunions, I got pregnant the third time. And now I was outraged womanhood because I knew this guy was trying to keep me pregnant and barefoot and out in the country, and I couldn't stand it because we lived out in suburbia. And incidentally, when Olga talked last night about how terrible it was down in Skid Row, and I don't know this for sure, but I think for us women, for me, it was a hell of a lot harder walking around that neighborhood trying to maintain a shred of respectability. I have worked with a gal who was on Skid Row, and she said it was easy down there because nobody expected anything of you and nobody really gave a damn. But out in suburbia, they give you that look. And, the thing that kills you in here. And it's tough to hang on to one shred of respectability. So what I would do is don my cloak of arrogance, because that's what I thought respectability was. Anyway, I was drunk all the time. I was carrying my third child, and I'm not particularly proud of that, nor do I have to be ashamed of it anymore, and nor do I believe that any of us set out to do the things that caused us and those around us so much pain and sorrow. I don't remember ever sitting down and saying, I'm going to do this, that, or the other. I do remember many mornings saying, my God, I hope I never do that again. But I don't remember ever sitting down and plotting and planning and doing the things that hurt everybody. I don't, and including me. And so after my daughter was born, my husband left me for what turned out to be the last time. And now I was free to live and do as I pleased. I was free. My mother and father had turned their backs on me, which was one of the best things they ever did, and they never went to Al-Anon. But I can remember my mother coming over and screaming at me. Now, she used to come over and clean my house and take care of my kids and scream at me. And I often say this because, if she were still doing that, I'd be either dead or insane. But she finally gave up out of her own frustration. And I remember her screaming at me and saying, can't you see what you're doing to your children? And there was no way that I could say to her it was because I could see what I was doing to those children that made it necessary for me to blot it out with another drink, and another drink, and another drink. See, I really wanted to be a good mother. I wanted to be a good wife. I wanted to be a good woman, and I could not. I could not. And so now I found myself in situations that had never happened to me before. The things that started to happen to me were the things that I said would never happen to me. I often said if I ever got that bad, I would quit. And I got that bad, and I did not quit because my frame of reference kept going down with each drink, with each day. And I hope I never forget being thrown out of that bar where I was once welcome. One Sunday morning, I guess it was, I don't remember, when the bartender said, "Out, Mary." And I got this twinge in here because I had not recalled having been in there the night before. I hope I never forget that I came to in an alley one cold gray dawn, sick and shaking and scared. But the one thing that will never be erased from my memory is one Sunday morning when I was lurching down Ventura Boulevard, which is one of our main thoroughfares, on a Sunday morning. And I had dropped into the bar to get a Manhattan because I was so sick. And I didn't drink. I didn't go in there to get drunk. I went in there to get well. I was so sick I needed that drink. And sometime later, I was lurching down Ventura Boulevard, falling again. I was one of those whose knees never held me up, falling against buildings. And I remember coming up in front of the Catholic Church, and Mass was just let out. And down the stairs came this husband and wife and their two little boys. And I hope I never forget the look in those kids' eyes. You see, I didn't want to be there like that. I didn't want anybody to see this drunken, falling down, dirty woman. And I remember choking on my own disgust and biting back my tears and cursing myself and wishing to God I'd drop dead right there. But you know, I wasn't through yet. And it went on and on. And all the things that happened to alcoholic women that I've heard started to happen to me in rapid succession, which drove me to drinking behind closed doors and drawn shades. Thank God my neighbors were more or less feeding my children because I was totally incapable of doing anything but drinking. I had given up trying to do anything. Everything was too much. Too much. And by this time, I had already attempted suicide twice, and I was in such a homicidal rage against my husband, and I really believed that I had found myself in this position in life because of him. It was all his fault, and I knew that the only way I could get this terrible rage out from inside was to kill him. And I sat there night after night. By now I was drinking around the clock, plotting how I was going to kill this man, and I have no doubt in my mind that had I been given the opportunity, I would have done so. But something happened before I could do that. I don't remember day or night they were all together, but it must have been what you call a spiritual awakening, because it seemed to me that I heard a voice that said, "Mary, you desperately need help." And I found myself next talking to the North Hollywood Clubhouse of Alcoholics Anonymous. I knew I was crazy, but I was reaching out for somebody to help me. And I really didn't believe I was an alcoholic. And I don't even know why I did that. In fact, I didn't remember where I had heard about Alcoholics Anonymous until I was sober about 2 years. And it happened that I was at a drunken brawl across the street from my house, and there was a red-haired woman there drinking a Coke. And I hated women. I really hated them. And to top it off, one that didn't drink was just out, totally out. And it seems to me that she said, I must have gone over and said, why the hell aren't you drinking or something? And it seems to me that she said something about having found a better way to live and something about AA. And I say that to remind myself that my responsibility is to scatter the seed and not demand that it sprout on the spot. Because it was 2 years later that the seed that she planted in me started to bloom, and I was calling Alcoholics Anonymous. And it was a young fellow that answered the phone. Now, you know, it's an unwritten rule in our community anyway, that men don't call on women. But God in his infinite wisdom sent exactly the right person. He said he would be out immediately. He sensed my despair, and he sensed that I was drunk and raving and crazy. He said he'd come out immediately. Now, I want to tell you that if he had any romantic inclinations on the way out to my house, by the time he got there and I opened the front door, he was met with 180 pounds of gray, screaming insanity. And especially if he was downwind, that would have killed any romance. I hadn't had a bath in I don't know how long. I had been inhabiting a dirty moo-moo for months. See, I said everything is too much. That moo-moo was a very functional drinking garment. You know, you can pass out in it, you can throw up on it, you can make the run in it, you can do anything in it. And that's the way it was necessary for me to live. And I really didn't care. I didn't care because I couldn't care. And this man came in with this big smile, and I hated him immediately. And I was drinking out of my cheese glass. And I said, aren't you going to stop me from drinking? He said, no, go ahead. That got my attention. Because no one had ever told me to keep drinking. And I say to you newcomers today, if all else fails, keep drinking. That'll make a believer out of you. If you make it back. And he kept talking, and he'd broke another rule. He said, you're an alcoholic. And that sounded rather scientific to me compared to the names that had been called. So I went along with it. I pretended that I knew inside that I wasn't, however. But he did talk me into going to my first AA meeting that night. And just before I left, I poured another drink and said, aren't you going to stop me from drinking? He said, no. And I said, to hell with it. And that's the last drink. I left that last drink right on the sink there. And I went to my first AA meeting. It was way the hell out in the country. And the state of mind that I was in, we just drove and drove and drove, and it was getting more desolate and dark and everything out there. And the state of mind I was in, I was thinking, maybe he's going to take me out here and kill me. And you know something? I was hoping he was. I really was hoping that he was. And we got out to that little tiny Chatsworth meeting where they had about maybe 20 people. And I looked in the window, and I thought, oh, God, another PTA group. And, you know, my heart sunk, because even though I wasn't an alcoholic, I wanted to belong to somebody or something. And I said, I can't go in there, Paul. And he said, what do you mean you can't go in there? He said, they're nice people. I said, I know that. I know that. That's the wrong thing to tell me, because I wasn't a nice person. And so he was pretty sneaky. He said, well, come on over to the door and look through the door this way. I would like to tell you people that I came waltzing into AA and say I found it. What happened really was he got me in front of the door and took his hand and shoved me in. And I was drunk, and I don't remember that first meeting. But he did put me almost in the lap of the woman who was to become my first sponsor. And she represented everything I hated in women. She was soft-spoken. She was spiritual, well-groomed, cunning, baffling, and powerful. And she spoon-fed my soul. Now, I would like to tell you people that I have the most overwhelming respect for these old mossback, old-timers, mean ones. Because there were 5 men in that group and my sponsor who would brook no nonsense from me, and I will be eternally grateful for that, because if they had babied me, they'd have buried me. And this woman took me home that night, and she turned to me in my driveway and said, our relationship has to be based on strict honesty, and I almost died. I didn't even know I was a liar until then. And then she said something that, oh my God, she said, I want you to be ready tomorrow night at 8 o'clock. We're going to a woman's stag. And I almost threw up. I was so scared, and I was so afraid to tell her I hated women. And so it took, and then she drove away. I'd tell you, as she drove away, over her shoulder, she said, and by the way, I would appreciate it if you'd take a bath. And I thought, what do they want from me, these people? Don't they know who I am? So it took all day the next day to get ready. I would like to say that I was in the right group, because even though I didn't believe I was an alcoholic, I was also an agnostic. And as I look back now, there was a power in that group. There was a power with those people that called me the next day, and I was afraid to believe and I was afraid not to. That power of unconditional love that started me on this road. The power. That's the thing that got me started. You know, even though I denied many things that I heard, I could not deny what I saw and what I felt in those groups. Even though those people were mean to me, even though they were telling me to do things I didn't want to do, even though they didn't understand really, because my case was different, it was the power that came through that let me know that even as mean as they were in giving their simple directions to me, that they cared about what happened to me as a person. And so I started to go to 10 meetings a week, simply because I couldn't get enough, drink up enough of that power, that love that I felt. I couldn't get enough. And my husband heard that I had joined AA, and he, in his own sickness, started to call me and threaten me, threatened to take the children. And he was insane at the time. And he used to drive me up the wall. Here I was saying the Serenity Prayer until it was threadbare. And I was doing all these things. I was really trying to do what my sponsor was advising me to do and trying to remain calm, and I was like this all the time. And here this man was really driving me up the wall, and finally I called my sponsor, and I was hysterical, and I said, I'm going to kill that guy if he comes anywhere near me. I don't care if I haven't had a drink for a long time. I got to kill that guy. And I said, what am I going to do? And she said, hang up. It never occurred to me. But I really am grateful that they spoke to me in very simple terms and gave me very simple directions. And there was no arguing at all. I mean, they told me not to argue because they were too busy for that. So the next time I knew he was going to, he called at a certain time of the day. I heard the phone ring, and I went over, and with my guts churning, I picked up the phone and I said, I'm sorry, but you're upsetting my serenity. And I hung up real fast. I started to do the things that weren't going to work for me, and they started to work because they also reminded me that I was to stop fighting anything or anybody. Those were the days when my sponsor used to drive me crazy by saying, Mary, there's always a light at the end of the tunnel. And what I wanted to say to her and was afraid to was, that light at the end of the tunnel is an oncoming train to me. God, those scary days. And little by little by little, I started to assimilate. And as I said before, I pretended that I was an alcoholic. And for the benefit of you shoppers and the new people, if you have some doubts, fake it till you make it. That's what I did. Just fake it. It'll all work out one way or the other. And so I started to do all these things, and, everything started to smooth out because I wasn't fighting and he wasn't calling, and I started to feel some kind of peace and some semblance of serenity, and I was really getting into the woman stag in particular, because when I went up there that first time, I just knew that I wasn't going to fit in there, especially when I saw the girl that was leading the meeting. She had one of these long, blonde page boys, every hair in place. She had a little expensive black dress with the pearls and, that kind of a very elegant kind of gal. And I thought, Jesus, a toast burner, Probably never been off the block, and I knew that if it's going to be like that, I didn't belong there, that's for sure. But I really feel that when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. Because the next gal that got up talked in my native tongue, which was profanity. And I started to listen. And it wasn't very long until I really loved those women. They saved my sanity, and they gave me direction like I didn't want to hear. But I knew. I was looking at them, and I still today have my women up on a pedestal because they inspired me so much. I still have some of those women thinking, God, I hope eventually I'll be something like that because I feel that the recovered woman alcoholic is the most fabulous woman on the face of the earth. I really do. And if you don't believe that, just watch the way they carry themselves and what they are. And I just love every one of them. That's a long way for me to come. That's a long way for someone who's been falling down in alleys and hating women to come. I had been going to all these 10 meetings a week and doing all these things and on the phone most of the time. And one day my husband called again, and he apparently had a bad day at the races, or I don't know what it was. He was insane again, and again started to threaten me. And, the whole homicidal feeling rose up in me, and I was screaming again. When I went to the woman's stag that night. And I was yelling and screaming and totally insane and begging for direction. And I'll never forget the advice that one of those women gave me, and I use it today. She said, pray for the son of a bitch. And that's the last thing I wanted to do. Of course, everything's been the last thing I wanted to do. Including, from the first step on, everything's been something I didn't want to do. However, they always told me to take the action and the motive would change. The action is the magic word. And that night at the end of the woman's stag, during the Lord's Prayer, I prayed for him. And I didn't mean a damn word of it. But I kept doing it, and I kept doing it, and it started to work to the point where we were able to sit down and talk like two human beings to one another, talk about the future of our children, and realize and admit that our marriage had been a bad mistake. Now, he was a nice guy. He was a good guy. He was a sick guy, and so was I. And we were just, it was just no good for us to be together. We got that all smoothed out. And then one day, one of those hard-nosed guys in my home group came to me and he said, don't you think it's about time you made amends to him? And by that time, I just did what they told me automatically. And I guess this is one of the greatest gifts I was given in my beginning sobriety, because I was able to make amends to this man just 2 weeks before he died of a heart attack. And I don't know what would have happened to me had he died when I hated him so much. I don't know whether I could have gone along with the guilt and all those feelings, but I was given that privilege by people who cared about me when I couldn't care about myself. And this is where my never-ending love affair with the people of Alcoholics Anonymous started. Because even though I was sober only 4.5 months, It seems to me that literally hundreds of AA people came to me by phone, by car, by telegram, in person, asking what they could do for me, asking what I needed, asking nothing in return. And I was overwhelmed and sustained. And now came the hard part, because he and I were both terribly in debt. So here I was, no money, in fact in debt, with 3 little kids, and where do I go from here? It seems strange to me now that I never really had a terrible panic or a fear. I felt so protected. I felt surrounded in AA. And I had now known the reason for one day at a time. And so it was necessary for me to go to work. And ran a clubhouse for a while. And finally got a job in a hospital kitchen, which was consisted of washing pots and pans, cleaning employees' toilets, and doing a lot of menial things. And I tell you, it was one of the best things that ever happened to me in AA. It was the thing that I needed to do in order for my values to change. Because my values had always been money, property, and prestige. And I'd had those things, and I came up empty. They turned to ashes in my mouth. And so it was necessary to remove a lot of arrogance, a lot of ego, and especially a lot of pride. And I used to cry and scream at my new sponsor and tell her that I wanted to get out of there and do anything else. And she said, no, you stay there until you learn what you're supposed to be learning. And I have since known that I really can't pound and scream and kick at a door that doesn't open easily for me. I have to go down the hall and go through a door that opens easily for me. I cannot, as they told me in the beginning, I had to stop beating my high chair with my spoon. That's how mean they were to me. And so I stayed at that job. It did change my values. It did change my attitude. It got me down to where I belong. Because if my attitudes hadn't changed, I wouldn't have been ready for what was to come. I want to tell you about my kids. I hope I will always cherish the time when my son was chosen first string varsity in high school football. And going out to that stadium for the first time, walking in and realizing what a privilege it was for me to be walking into that stadium sober. And I started to think of how it could have been if it hadn't been for the people who cared about me when I couldn't care about myself. And I started to get so overwhelmed with gratitude that it was right up here. And I wanted to retain and drink in all of that gratitude. And so I sat clear at the end of the field and watched those kids warm up out on the field. They're doing their... And I really was starting to choke up because I thought to myself, how come I'm allowed to sit here sober with my head up and take part in such a big thing in my kid's life? Why me? Why me? And when they called his name over the loudspeaker, I broke down and cried because my gratitude was choking me. And my second son followed in his footsteps, and I was out there every Friday, and every Friday I got the same feeling God, it was just overwhelming. And as a matter of fact, my second son was playing opposite. Some of you know Keith C. from our area. He's a former professional football player who's in the program for 11 years now. He and I went out to a football game where his kid and my kid were on opposing teams. And my kid was guarding his kid in the end zone, and my kid intercepted a pass that was meant for his kid and ran that ball back 65 yards, and I went ape, you know. I was pounding on. Well, it's the first time I wet my pants since I sobered up. See, my values had changed. I could appreciate those things that are meaningful. And I got to go to that second kid's wedding 7 years ago, and it was a big formal thing, and I just felt so good walking down that aisle with my other kids squeezing my arm like this. I just felt so wonderful about that. And about 2 months ago, they since have joined the Christian movement, and they decided to renew their vows. They've given me 2 beautiful grandchildren. And we were all invited, and afterwards they were having some kind of party for this second wedding type of thing. And he came over and knelt by my chair, and he said, "Mother, I have to talk to you seriously." And I said, "What is it?" He said, "Mother, you've got to be saved." And I said, "You son of a bitch, you don't know what it is to be saved." His eyes opened that wide, and he said, "Yeah, you're right." But, you know, there had been so many fantastic experiences. I've had joys and I've had sorrows, and both have been acute. And I really believe that AA works best when things go bad. Because my daughter, at the age of 11, picked up her first drink, and she was a primary shoe-in alcoholic. I didn't or could not or would not see what was happening to her. It never occurred to me that she was an alcoholic for several years. I just thought she was going through a stage. But she started to get into drugs also. And then came the heartbreak, the agony, the frustration of watching my daughter turn into the same kind of animal that I had become. And I can't even describe to you the feelings I had when I'd go down to the police station to bail her out or to sign an APB, the sleepless nights when she was gone. And then, you know, again, the guilt and the heartbreak and all these things. But you know something? I was allowed to stay sober. I was allowed to stay sober, and that's the name of the game here. Because to me, sobriety isn't about new Cadillacs and gorgeous jobs and all that stuff. I mean, there's a better chance of getting them. And there's nothing wrong with having a Cadillac as long as you're sober when you're driving it either. But to me, sobriety, the bottom line is survival. And I was allowed to stay sober through, and the speakers tonight went through some of this with me, the terrible heartbreak and agony. Finally, she came to me one day, and something very dramatic had happened in her life, something very hurtful, and she decided that she wanted no more of it. And it was at that time that the bank, everything fell into place because the bank bought my house, and a lot of things happened which opened the doors for me to go to Honolulu. And we decided to start life anew down there for her. And of course, I knew better, but I didn't, you know, hope springs eternal. And we went down there, and for a couple of months she was fine. And then she got caught up with the gang again. And thank God, by now I was working I was directing a woman's recovery house at St. Francis Hospital in Honolulu. And thank God I was busy with those women because I don't know, it was just, it was almost too much for me. And I'd kick her out and always with the promise, bring her back again. I was caught up in the game, a game I knew so well that I had played so well. And things got so bad finally, this went on for several years, things got so bad finally that I went to Al-Anon. I joined Al-Anon over there. And thank God for those women who gave me the strength, the courage, the direction to allow me to do the last thing I wanted to do in this world. The hardest thing I've ever done in my sobriety. I don't think there's anything harder for a woman alcoholic to do, especially when you're burdened with a little bit of guilt about your own kid. I had to take my daughter down to the Honolulu airport, and while she was crying and screaming and begging for another chance, I had to push her on the plane and tell her to get the hell out of my life. And I had to walk away as fast as I could, because I knew that if I stood there, that I'd give her another chance, and I knew I was going to kill her if I did. And the AA women and the Al-Anon women were there waiting for me and took me back and gave me the support that I needed. Several months later, my boss gave me a short vacation, and it came to pass. Isn't it funny, it never says and it came to stay? It came to pass that I chose to go to the West San Fernando Valley where I got my sobriety. And I walked into a Sunday night meeting there, one of my home groups. And my daughter was reading chapter 5. And it tore me up. It tore me up. And how do you express to you people? I have no words. I have no words to express to those people who cared about me when I could care about myself, so that it was possible for both of us. And my daughter has not had a drink, a pill, or a funny cigarette since her first meeting, which is 6 years ago. She's 23 years old, and she was not quite 17 when she came to us. And I want to say here now that I don't want to hear anybody tell these kids that they're too young to be an alcoholic. After all, we call it a disease. Because somebody said that to my daughter in a meeting, and she looked him square in the eye and she said, "But I'm not too young to die." Because I believe that no matter whether you're rich or poor, or young or old, or straight or gay or whatever, green, black, orange, or blue, I believe you have a right to get well in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I think it's my personal responsibility that when anyone anywhere reaches out their hand, that I will be available. Because there's no way that I can ever pay back what has been given to me except through trying to pass it on to somebody else. I thank God from the bottom of my heart for my sobriety. Because, you see, a little over 18 years ago, I came in hating the world and everybody in it, and especially me. And today, as I stand here, I am enemy to no person on this earth. To no one. I live now with that woman that I never got along with, my 88-year-old mother. And it ain't easy. I tell you, before she came to live with me, I thought I had it all put together. And that's why I say I realize now that I got all of my character defects intact. But the point is that we are living together and have been for the last couple of years. And I would like to I'd like to share with you what happened last Christmas. I was preparing Christmas dinner. Now, we have a very small kitchen, and I can't stand anybody in the kitchen when I'm cooking there. And my poor mother was in there trying to help me. She was driving me up the wall because she was under my elbow, and I was stumbling over her and all this. And I could feel my self-centeredness griping at me, and I knew I was getting madder by the minute, but I didn't want to blow it. And I thought that there's only, I have God on hold most of the time. So I thought, well, there's only one thing I can do, and that's say the Serenity Prayer. And I went over to the window and I said the Serenity Prayer as hard as I could, because I didn't want to be unkind to her. And with that, now she doesn't speak English, which is part of the story. With that, I went into the living room and turned on the TV to the Mexican station. And do you know what? God provided for me something that I wouldn't have thought of in my wildest dreams. The Pope was saying Catholic Mass from the Vatican for the first time, and they were translating it into Spanish. And I took her in there, and she sat there for 3 goddamn hours. Is that fantastic? Is that fantastic? Everything's so fantastic. I want to tell you how much I've enjoyed meeting a lot of you people. I really do love you with everything I've got, because I am a product of your power, your love, which has come from God. But most of all, I want to thank you for teaching me to walk in freedom and in the dignity of sobriety. And for that, I thank you from the bottom of my heart.